Alright, so welcome back to another review. This time we're taking a look at the SIVGA SV023s. So I get a message from SIVGA themselves asking me to check out their new SV023s. We'll just call them the 23s from here on out. Well, if you're one of my OG subscribers, you'll recall I've reviewed a handful of their headphones already. And I did enjoy my time with those, for the most part. Well, it's been a few years, so I was curious to see how they've progressed as a company, and above all, as a team that appeals to the audio enthusiasts. Now, before we begin, quick shout out to SIVGA for sending these out to me. They did not influence my opinion in any way, shape, or form. All thoughts in this review are entirely my own. Also, shout out to one of my patrons, Igor. Remember to check out the Patreon for a bit of goodies if you'd like to support the channel. Now, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into it. So let's begin with contents, build quality, and comfort. Let's break this down. As you unbox this bad boy, you start with, well, the box. Now on the back, you see their company mission statement. Created with craftsman spirit. It's nice. It's very nice. As you slide the top off, you're greeted with, yeah. The first thing you see is a skin-colored, thick headphone case that clearly does not skip the squats. I mean, you just want to, like, just, you know. Anyway, everything else is inside this case, so unzip it. Now within that, you'll see the 23s sitting pretty, and a skin-colored pouch. Within that pouch, you'll see the beautiful braided cable it comes with, and the Pentacon to 3.5mm single-ended adapter. Surprisingly, it doesn't come with a 3.5mm to 1/4 inch adapter, but that's okay. Those aren't that pricey, whereas a cable or adapter of this quality, it definitely can be. And that's it, really. Now, the 23s are built out of metal on pretty much every part except the bungee strap, the pads, and the cups. Despite that, these are surprisingly lightweight. They definitely feel lighter than they look, trust me. Now, the bungee strap itself actually feels very plush, very soft and premium, even if I know it's just pleather. Now, unlike most pleather materials used in other headphones, this feels very, very soft and wet. Very supple to the touch. Now these pads are very unique. They're a hybrid fenestrated material with pleather on the outside and velourish material on the inside. Also, in case you haven't noticed yet, they have a very weird shape. I mean, you know, look at this. Starts out thick at the bottom and then it progresses to being a thin slit at the top. It's interesting, very interesting design. Now last, but certainly not least, the cups are made of walnut wood. Very well finished, no splinters, no cheapness, no nothing like that. It's a very premium feeling product if you ask me, as far as the wood is concerned. Now the drivers inside are your typical dynamic drivers, which doesn't discredit these in any way, shape, or form. I mean, we've come to see quite a lot of greatness from dynamic drivers. Now these headphones are comfortable. I mean, I'm being very honest here. They clamp hard enough to stay on your head at all times, but feel soft and light enough to not cause too much fatigue or pressure. Now they're over-ear headphones, but are compact and small enough to not feel like you're using a massive block on your head. Now I can imagine that people with larger ears might find these a tad too small in terms of the cup's diameter, but to me they're right at the point where they don't touch my ears. If anything at all, and I mean I'm nitpicking here, I would have liked a teensy bit more clamp pressure, just a bit. Now let's talk about this cable here. I mean, just wow. This has to be the second best stock cable I've ever received. Now I say the second best because my first is still the Sennheiser HT600 Marbles OG cable. So that's the OG HT600. I would have never guessed that this was a stock cable, really. I mean, just look at this. Premium feeling materials, very, very lightweight, thin and out of the way, doesn't retain its shape, it's balanced. You look at this. It's balanced, Pentacon balanced. It's the perfect length for a smaller desktop setup. It's all there. It's really all there. This looks like something I would pay at least $150 for on some website that claims it's made out of like vibranium and obsidian, forged with gamer girl bathwater or something. Maybe if you didn't like brown, that knocks off some points, but I'd say that brown really goes with the wooden aesthetic of the headphone. Here, side by side, close enough of a brown, but they go well together, just copper and walnut. Now we're looking at the same thing with that adapter here. Very, very sturdy, very, very premium, very rigid, and yeah, once again, copper, thin, lightweight. Well, maybe this part's a little on the heavy side, but it's not a big deal whatsoever. Seriously, great job with the cable, just wow. Now let's discuss amplification. So these claim to have an impedance level of 300 ohms with a sensitivity of 105 decibels. So in theory, they don't sound too hard to push. Now, running these off of the THX AAA 789, I ran these at 11 on gain 2 using single-ended mode. Unfortunately, I don't have a Pentacon to XLR adapter, so no balanced on this amp. As for the iFi IDSD signature, I ran these at about 10 on both single-ended and balance modes, with normal gain, by the way. So as you can see, totally doable. It's very, very doable. You don't need anything special to run these, but we'll get to that in a moment. In the sound, well, in the notes and observations portion of this review. Now let's jump into the sound. So once again, all testing will be done in stock configuration. No mods will be done to the sound whatsoever. For clarification, single-ended testing was performed on the THX AAA 789, while balance testing was performed on the iFi signature. Now let's begin with the bass. So bass is decent. It digs somewhat deep, but not too much into the extremities. There's a little bit of punch to it as well, just slightly above neutral, particularly in the mid and upper bass. I'll give you an example of a bass guitar's texture. Get Lucky by Daft Punk. It's my go-to for bass guitars most of the time. At the 14-second mark, that bass guitar does that smooth slide that ends the intro and starts the second part of that right before Pharrell comes in. I can mostly hear the entire note, but I'll be frank, it's just not exciting to me because it lacks the fine detail and texture in those notes. It's just not refined enough. Electronic bass definitely feels like it's got a little bit of a boost, particularly around the 80 Hz range. After this though, it really just kind of rolls off into nothingness pretty quickly. An example of that, Zealots of Stockholm by Childish Gambino. At the 3:05-minute mark, the bass does a smooth roll-off, followed by a pickup in the bass, right before the big lady says, "I'm a freaky bitch." You know that part. So here, rather than a smooth roll-off, the decay is far slower, then just kind of disappears into nothingness. Then on the pickup, there's nothing, 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 and then a strong bass note out of nowhere as we approach the end of it. So yeah, not the best of bass responses here. There's a minor hump in the mid bass, and then there's a quick roll off. Now that hump remains up to the upper bass and lower mids as well. In The Hammer by Deathclock, the rhythm guitar sounds a bit too warm and thick by default. With these, it sounds just a bit warmer and thicker, though not enough to detract from the track. And by the way, this area that I'm talking about lies somewhere between 120 to 180 Hz. Now, drums sound pretty healthy, definitely a bit fuller than neutral, but not too much. So overall, bass is decent. Definitely not impressing me though. Let's discuss the mids. Now these are actually quite forward in the vocals, particularly with female vocals. I won't say that vocals literally stand in front of instruments by a significant distance. It's more of a combination between that and a sort of like crater in the middle left exclusively for vocals. They definitely possess a bit of a shouty quality to them that actually reminds me of the iSign 10 way back when I had those. Honestly, not the worst quality a headphone hood could have, but it's still not something I'd consider enjoyable to listen to. I suppose you could spin it positively and just call it energetic, but yeah. Now speaking positively about it, vocals are pretty clear and discernible. So if vocals are your thing, you know what to do. Speaking negatively about it though, try listening to Summit by Skrillex and Ellie Goulding. The male voice that pops in and out can be pretty off-putting because of the wider difference in dynamism between the vocals and the rest of the track. Like you're just trying to enjoy the track, the instrumental, and then and it just, yikes. Ish. Cello. Pros and cons. The pro here is that it sounds quite articulate and pretty detailed, particularly in the pizzicato area. The con, however, is that it sounds thinner and a bit more nasal than what I'd consider to be natural. Now, upper brass instruments are lively and energetic, so Tank by the Seatbelts. The trumpets, trombones, and of course the saxophone, they hit you with a bit more energy than average. In this track, at least, it's actually pretty enjoyable because that's what the track is supposed to be. It's supposed to be exciting, action-packed, like bam, hit you with the energy. So overall, some pretty energetic and forward mids here. I can dig it. Generally speaking, I like it. Now let's discuss the treble. So it's surprisingly inoffensive. The highs aren't laid back by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel they come forward and show you the entire picture without really introducing any sort of glare or harshness to the sound. Sibilance is pretty much the same here. I catch the slightest glimpse of sibilance, but it's so mild you wouldn't really notice it. And I would argue that that little extra spice is worth it for the extra clarity it brings along with it. And for the record, I did test it with Bangarang by Skrillex. The highs themselves were pretty in line, but energetic. I will mention though, the offensive part of this track was in the vocals. Every like, yeah, and Bangarang and whatnot. It just got a little too shouty for me. So generally, treble, very close to neutral. Sometimes it can dig a tad below. Sometimes it can dig a tad above. But in the highest of highs, it can roll off a little bit too quickly, just a bit too much for my liking. But it's still always within range. And it's pretty smooth as well. It gets a solid thumbs up from me as far as that's concerned. Solid is definitely the right word to use here. Now let's discuss Soundstage and Imaging. These are definitely more on the narrow side of things. If I were to feel out the soundstage width outside of the cups, I'd put my hands about an inch or two away from the cups. This is probably what I'd measure the soundstage to be. There's really not a whole lot of space to these, but I really can't complain. It's not so much about the space it's given, it's about what the headphone chooses to do with it. Yeah, copyright that bit. Which brings us to imaging. You know what? These are pretty freaking good as far as imaging is concerned. Like I said, a small amount of soundstage to work with, but sure enough, it works with it. It really does trade blows with many of the imaging kings out there, especially within this price point. Unfortunately though, it still doesn't compare with the likes of the HD800S. Want to know why though? It's not that it isn't technically capable of it. It's just that it's missing that soundstage to really shine. So I guess bringing us back to the soundstage, you know what? It does bother me. It bothers me that it is that narrow. Why? Because if we had a wider soundstage, these would truly shine with it. Now let's get to the notes and observations portion of the review. I should point out that there was one song that really got me moving with these. Orion by Shy Kid X. There's just something about the overall presentation of this song, the energy, the amount of bass, the amount of treble, the amount of everything. It's just smooth but energetic. Like it pushes it forward and puts it right in front of your face, but not to the point where it is, where it detracts from the experience. Okay, now, put on your tinfoil hats. You may roll your eyes at me when I say this, but listen. Listening to these imbalanced actually makes a difference to the sound. Now, this time I'm doing this comparison by hopping back and forth between the IDSD Signature's 3.5mm and 4.4mm connections, because, you know, I can. And the difference is definitely there. So to my ears, when using these in balance, bass gets a bit tighter and textured. That drop in Zealots of Stockholm at the 3:05-minute mark gets a bit more clear cut as to when it disappears and when it reappears, rather than the just kind of ooh. Vocals get a bit smoother and easier to enjoy. Cellos lose an ounce of detail, but improve in timbre. An overall trade-off that I say is for the better. Now, treble may become a tad more discernible at certain parts of the frequency, but not by much. It's really just not a significant amount of difference. And last of all, soundstage and imaging, they're really not affected in any way here. So overall, if you can run these balanced, I do recommend it. Find a way to run these balanced. But if it's a big deal to spend and so on and so forth, it's not the end of the world either. So, conclusion. It is time to answer the question, are the SIVGA SV023 worth your hard-earned cash? The answer to that is maybe. See, these sit somewhere around that master of none, jack of all trades category. However, they fall flat a bit with bass extension, treble extension, and mids timbre to an extent. And I really meant what I said about that comfort. It's incredible. Like, if I really had to nitpick, I would just make the clamp force a smidge tighter and make the overall cup size just a tad bit wider, just a bit, so more people's ears will fit inside completely and hopefully increase soundstage while you're at it. So it's tough to punish them for what they do wrong just because of all they can do right. At that $450 price point, sound-wise, these are a must for people who value a mostly neutral response, but want them to be mid-centric with a dash of punch in the mid-bass and the slightest of spice in the treble. Otherwise, there may be some slightly better alternatives to choose from. As for what those are, you'll have to wait for my upcoming comparisons against audio all-stars such as the Sennheiser HD600, HiFiMAN Sundaras, and the Focal LX. So stick around and hit that subscribe button if that interests you at all. So yeah, that's it. They're pretty interesting and definitely appeal to a very particular demographic, though they're not for everyone. For now, that's all she wrote. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this helped your purchasing decision, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, ciao.